So thanks for making the time today. I really appreciate you taking the time to participate to this webinar. I understood that some of you already have business dealings abroad. So for those of you, maybe some of this information is already known, but it never, it's always good to, you know, review or see other opinions and thoughts. For some of you that are just starting, this will provide quite a lot of value. Did any of you participated to the SODA event in Katowice, where I presented at the conference? No? Okay, so you can use the
No.
chat window for yes or no, or whatever it's easier. Okay, good. So I'm just, this is actually a bit of a fresh information. So basically, based on that presentation, I updated it, and I hope and I think it's gonna be a bit more relevant. I am actually an entrepreneur at heart. I have a few businesses. Some of them happily went international. I actually have two businesses that I started directly in the States, and they have no business in Europe. So now I think I'm an international entrepreneur. But in general, what I'd love to do is I love to help people and companies grow. I actually believe the same thing as Jack Ma from Alibaba says, that the future belongs to SMBs, because the small and medium enterprises are actually the main source of jobs in the business sector all across the world, although there are quite good differences between different countries. But like recent studies showed that anywhere between 60 to 80% of the whole jobs are provided in the small and medium enterprise sector. So I think that our mission here is very important. I hope that what you'll take out of this webinar is some tools and options for you to expand on international markets. I hope I'm gonna influence you to take direct action to go international and expand your business like massively and develop your teams on international scale. And I hope I'm gonna empower you to grow and to boldly go when wherever others or nobody went before. So I understand that we have, let's say, at least 30 minutes with some of you. I hope most of you will stay by the end and even for the Q&A session. But if not, this is going to be available later on at your request as a recording. If I'm not sure you know much about NNC, which is one of the biggest businesses that I'm an entrepreneur in. I founded it in 2006, and NNC went global pretty early on. So we had international customers, even from the beginning. Like one of our first customer was a Swedish customer. And in 2011, we already opened our first office in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm actually an entrepreneur with businesses that I think right now range over $10 million in total revenue per year. I think, so the biggest business that I own in the States last year, it started, and we actually closed the year at $1,800,000. It's actually an IT product business in biotech. So another thing that I do like is to participate as a member in NGOs. I'm a communications board chair for the Entrepreneurs Organization. This is a 15,000 entrepreneurs worldwide organization. They opened recently the Polish chapter, actually. So if you're interested in that, I'd be happy to maybe share some more into the Q&A. But please use such networking opportunities, because they are invaluable for me to develop as an entrepreneur, to have international peers and networks. So this may be something of use and interest for you as well. So you may be wondering, for example, what does it mean to have an international business? And whenever people ask this, they believe that it means that you have to be global, you have to be like IBM, or you have to be like this really huge company and have unlimited resources. But in fact, you don't have to be present on all markets. And if you go by the definition, you just have to have activities in place to promote the transfer and goods and services across border. So for example, for your company, it's enough to have even customers outside Romania or Bulgaria or Poland. And that means you already are running international business. So, you know, we need to demystify this tough image that international business has, and we need to bring it closer to home. And there is a way to expand your business in international markets in a very easy or lean methodology. So if you're familiar with the lean methodology, lean startup methodology, I believe that we can reflect this in international business as well. So is anybody convinced that your business wants to go to international markets, or are you still asking if international business is an option for you? So can you share in the chat window if you know that your business has plans to go international? Okay, nice, big yes. Happy to hear it. Is anybody here, let's say, not convinced that international business is good for them? No, okay, so everybody agrees that international business is a good idea. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I just wanted to say that, for example, there are usually basic needs that I know for sure that going international would solve for your business, right? Because sometimes locally, for example, the business is not big enough, right? Or your business may be in a plateau. It may not develop further because you have, let's say, 40% of the local market for your specific niche or for your specific product. Let's say you have software as a service product and you already have 40% of a small market. So then you need to go outside just to be able to grow over the opportunities of the domestic market. But what I found very interesting and strategic long-term was the fact that you can actually connect with very large and established companies to create strategic partnerships. But also a very important fact is bringing know-how back home. For example, when we started our own business, marketing in the States was more advanced than marketing in Europe. If I was talking in back in 2006 with someone about marketing in what it means, nobody really knew. Maybe just in IT. In the States, already the market was mature for this, or they embraced more easily newer technologies. And so I was able to bring back a lot of knowledge and know-how, which we didn't have locally, like the customer requests and the education that they had there forced us to develop the business in this way as well. It's also, if you are in the product business, it's amazing to have customers outside, for example, as against what you would get, let's say, as a valuation in Eastern Europe. You can get at least 2 to 3 times in countries like France, and you can get about even 5 to 10 times valuation in countries like the US, just because there's more money available. They believe more in startup, right? This is why from, I don't know, 20 worldwide unicorns, there was this stat that was saying that like 14 are just from the Silicon Valley. So they have the money and resources to fund more business. And for example, if you address the enterprise market with your product or service, 50% of the global spending is done in the US. Okay, so for example, if you have an ERP, let's say, or any business solution, going to the US market is a must, right? Otherwise, all of the other countries are very limited. 1 second. Okay, so you may be wondering, where is your next big opportunity? There is this story about a company in UK that was producing shoes, and they sent 2 salespeople to Africa. Some other story says to India. It doesn't really matter. So they sent it to Africa, let's say, and one of the salespersons came back and say, "Oh, these people do not wear shoes. There's no way we can sell in there and expand our business." And the other salesperson came back and say, "Oh, the opportunity is huge for us. These people do not have shoes." So what that means is that it doesn't really matter the size of the market or the maturity even sometimes of the market, as much as it matters your vision on it and your take on it, right? So the way that you see that you can develop your business and your approach, your strategy to enter the market, right? However, because I've noticed that most of the people that registered for this webinar are in the IT, software and services business, I gather some data in regards to what the global market of IT looks like. And for example, from the total global spend in IT, in the US, a third is spent. In Europe, a fifth, almost a fifth is spent, right? And in particular in service, 11% of the whole, let's say, global spending is done in software, but in the US, 18%, right? So again, it seems that, and this is a bit self-obvious. However, we have customers that are going to Kenya or to the Emirates or to Asia and have a great market opportunity. And sometimes if your market is very competitive in the States or in Western Europe, let's say, you may even want to consider to enter emerging markets where there's not that much competition, right? So this is definitely not to say that you have to go to this country or another just because of the stats, but please do your homework and research a lot about the market when you're planning to enter a new market, okay? So, because we were talking a bit just prior to this webinar on what are your options for an international business, and I heard someone mentioning that they try to enter directly the German market. This is the, let's say, more traditional manner of entering the market, right? So, for example, what people think in general is that this classic stage model, and the classic stage model says that you have to set up the office, that you have to hire employees, and you need to wait like for a while until the market catches up to you and so on. This requires a lot of investment, and I'm not sure that a small to medium-sized business can really afford nowadays the classical stage model, right? I do believe that sometimes even big international companies are trying to get around this classic stage model just because it's so expensive and also is higher risk, okay? So what may be some of the options for you? And for example, the person that was sharing before that they tried to enter the German market and with the classical model, they said that next time maybe we think of a partnership, and choosing a partner on the new market is definitely a way to go. There is actually in theory, but we will talk about practice more, but I listed here 3 models that you may want to study if you are considering to expand your business on international markets. And that the first one is the network model. In plain words, that usually means that go through your network of contacts, use your peers, ex-colleagues that are now moved to other markets, suppliers that may be from, I don't know, your hosting supplier that may be in the States, your accountant, your something. Use connections and peers, use your customers' connections. or your partners' connections that are from outside the market. So going through the network always provides you with lower cost, and you actually go over a very important factor, at least for some of the markets, and we'll see which ones are those. But for example, the network model gives you a lot of trust. So because you are a friend of a friend or someone, a connection of someone they trust, they will trust you, which is very critical for some of the new markets, right? There is the international entrepreneurship theory. That means that usually a very driven entrepreneur would fight the system and the culture of the new market and everything, and they will make it. They are very creative and innovative in expanding the business, and this is led by the main entrepreneur, or it doesn't need to be the main founder of the company, but it needs to be someone with an entrepreneurship mindset and attitude. And then there are the businesses that are born global. This is more valid for software as a services companies, for example, that they, from the start, some of these consider to address the global market, right? So I'm just back from Bulgaria. I was at the Growth Summit the last few days in Sofia. And in there, we met quite a few companies that went directly for global business, also because the local market was small, but also because they were Uberizing a service or something, and this was all software as a service based, and they needed to test international markets. So this is how they were born from start, right? There are also these models, as you can imagine, are not pure, so they are not 100% valid for everyone, and usually you will use a mixture of those. So for example, you may operate, like not go for the stage model, but for example, in a country with low trust in foreigners, like the US has very low trust in foreigners, you may want to set up at least a virtual office there that may not cost you so much, but it will still show local presence, right? Then you may want to go and meet customers face to face. So even if you don't have an office there, taking a plane to US these days is only like 6-7 hours, right? And the cost is rather affordable. Most of the countries in this territory can travel for $600 for a round trip. So that's really affordable. It's not so exclusive as it used to be. Asia is, let's say, worse because you have to sometimes travel more to get to the right business destinations. But I still think that it worth the trouble, and it's not that unaffordable. You may want to follow some of your business, let's say, partners or customers in the way they expand. For example, when we went to the States, we actually used the first customer, we used the network, the first customer that we helped expand to the States from Europe. And when they expanded there, we went with them and we helped them locally, and we used their network that we built, basically, right? So it's a symbiotic relationship, if you want to, right? But none of us took a lot of risk. We actually shared the risk, and we were supporting each other in our growth and market development, okay? I would also suggest that when you go to new territories, do not go on what it writes on the internet. Try to go where local people go, okay? So try to go, for example, in Germany at associations and events. In the USA, try to leverage a channel partner, like the AWS channel partner. If any of you know about this, try to use events like the reInvent. We had this Polish customer actually that was doing e-commerce solutions. They were a partner of AWS, and they went at our advice at reInvent even before they were ready for international market, and they already got a really good customer off of just this network channel, right? In the US, this is very important. Use the Salesforce partner channel. Use the, I don't know what other, let's say Microsoft. Microsoft is more conservative, but we can discuss a bit more and discover, for example, which partner channel is more suited and what you should leverage, right, for your business. So I would also suggest that if you cannot set up office in there, travel often to the new business location. In most places, like even in our side of the world, we still prefer to bring customers to our offices. We still prefer to bring business peers to our offices and make business face to face. It establishes trust. And it's easier when you see people face to face. You can mirror, right? Whatever they're doing, you can adjust. You can know people at their location. So this is why I suggest if you decide to go to Thailand or whatever, it doesn't matter, go there to meet customers face to face. And for example, sometimes if this is too expensive for you, there are a few options. One of them is there's a lot of European funding around expanding to new markets for innovative products and services. And these are small funds that can be accessed without a lot of bureaucracy, or these are really large, let's say, bureaucratic paperwork like the Horizon 2020. But mind you, look at digital hubs, leverage a lot of the digital hubs that are happening right now in all Europe, especially in our side of the world, to help you expand. Another way to go about it, especially if you have your own IP, is to raise funds in the new territory. So basically you can go to the States, raise funds in there, so that when you set up office in there, when you set up shop in there, you make it on the investment money, right? It deepens your commitment to the market. I hope this gives you at least a few ways. There's a ton of other ways to expand to the new markets. And for each company, based on your financial strength, based on your risk profile and so on, another way to expand may be more suited, okay? I hope that everything is clear until now. We can take a moment and answer some questions if you have any particular questions regarding, let's say, your options to expand to the new market. Or we can do that at the end as well. Okay? Mm-hmm. So we'll move on. Some of the questions, is there, for example, of course, the most important question is what are you selling, right? Because you have to figure out if there is a market of interest and interest. For example, it's not enough just to look at the figures and projections, right? It's good to know your market trends for your specific industry, but it's not enough. This gives you, let's say, the macroeconomic view. But it's very important to understand, you know, what are going to be the barriers when entering that market? What are going to be, for example, let's say in Poland, if I am planning to enter Poland with a product, I need to actually adjust to the Polish market, at least translate that software product so that people understand it in retail, for example, right? If I'm going to a new market, I have to ask myself before, is this market going to be a long-term plan for me, or is it something that I just want to do short term to bring in some business? Because then I'm not treating that necessarily as expanding my business, but as hunting customers in the new territory. And that's done, of course, after a different model, okay? And then I would advise you that you first do a test closer to home, because for a small, medium business, as I mentioned, even a small market may be good enough. There is plenty of business in our space in Europe, in countries like, I don't know, Belgium or the Netherlands or the UK or even Germany. There's a way to enter Germany, which we'll maybe have time to talk about briefly. But first do a test closer to home to see, you know, to gain trust in your product. But also it's easier to travel. It's in the same time zone. Cultural values are somewhat different, but people do still understand each other since they're closer. So some of the things that we did initially, again, this is all from experience, is, for example, having some KPIs. And right now, for example, we have 3 offices in Romania, and 1 in Poland, and 1 in Boston, Massachusetts. And what we did is, for example, ideally you would aim for 3 verticals and 3 countries. Some literature says even 3 continents when expanding your business. You don't have to do it at the same time, but basically the rule of 3 is mostly to mitigate. I call it the rule of 3, so you won't find it in the business literature, but the rule of 3 is done so that you can mitigate risk with by tackling a single vertical, or by going just to a single country. So even your home base country presents, you know, legislation change risk and so on. So if you're present in 2 markets, that's less risk, right? If you're present in different continents, that's even less risk, because it will mitigate each other, okay? And for example, we decided that we will open a local office when we have 5 sizable client accounts and 5 people on the new territory. So a 5-people team. So basically, when we see that there's the potential, it doesn't have to be so strict. So nobody would, if we have 4 sizable clients and 6 people, of course, this is also fine. I'm just saying that we use this as a benchmark. Ideally, you'd want to know what are your KPIs so that you know if you are successful, and you know in advance what you shoot for. Because just saying I want to go to US is not enough. What am I doing in the US? Do I want to open an office? Okay, if I want to open an office, what do I want to do there? I want to have 5 sizable client accounts, okay? And it's the same, let's say, with Germany, or even for an operational office. And the sooner you can meet these targets, the better it is, because you know that you are successful with your planning. The barriers that you need to overcome, I actually added and expanded a bit upon this section after the conference in Katowice, because there was a lot of interest around this. So this is why I will expand a bit longer. But if you want to move faster through it, just advise in the chat window, and I will try to make it briefer. Of course, for everybody, the language barrier is an obvious one, right? Like in Japan or in Poland. In Poland, in our domain, in IT, a lot of people speak perfect English, but not in every field. For example, there are customers entering the retail enterprise technology market in Poland, which, as I mentioned, needed to translate. In other countries, for example, you can go with English. I would advise you to go to, you know, the passage from Lost in Translation. Are you aware about that? Okay, so I'd advise you to review that to understand what our language barriers are about, but it's usually a barrier that you cannot cross. And what you can do is you can use, let's say, local partners in the sales conversation just to make sure. For example, from my own experience, we tried to enter about 6 years ago on the UK market, and we had such great conversations. Like, everybody was positive, the clients were replying, we had first great calls, but then nothing really happened. So in the next series, so in the next try, when we saw that business is not advancing, we brought some partner from the UK and we asked them to join us in the conversation. After a series of 5 calls, they told us, these are all happy talk. And I didn't even know what happy talk is. So for example, they say, well, a happy talk is when people speak very positively, but no business is happening. But only a local can understand when this is just happy talk, or when things are progressing towards business development, right? So please make sure that sometimes you bring a partner or a native or someone into the conversation to translate what's not translatable. In Japan, for example, there are words for someone that's not feeling the mood of the, let's say, people at the table, right? And there is also cultural norms around that person that's not understanding what's the mood at the table, and if they're not looking to you directly when you speak, and if their eyes are not, let's say, lightened and so on, it means that they won't do business with you. And this is again something that you cannot know unless you have a local, right? So a good translator may also help sometimes, but I prefer to have someone that's directly involved in the business relationship. Regarding cultural barriers, classical is to use the Hofstede insights for cultural differences assessment. Ideally, you'd go after a market that you know for sure that you can meet the cultural differences. So for example, let's say that in here, I know that in the US there's less trust, let's say, but I know that I can gain trust from those people, right? So that's not a barrier for me, but you need to be aware about these differences. The charts that I'm using here actually are from Erin Meyer's cultural map. I advise you to check out her tools. It's also very good to use within your own company, especially when you start having colleagues from abroad, because at some point when you expand to new markets, you will have colleagues. But it works also so in her tools work also in your own business culture, or even sometimes comparing you, if you're a salesperson, with the customer culture, right? And that's been very useful for me. So I've used that in the past. These are just a few of the comparisons, but with her tools, you can do much more. So you can check that out. For example, for a customer in Bulgaria, we had a really funny story about the Swedish value alignment. If you've ever worked and dealt with Swedish customers, they take a lot of time and a lot of meetings. For example, I used to work many years ago for a Swedish company, and a colleague of ours did the meeting to say that they have too many meetings. So considering that, you will know that in Sweden, value alignment and communications, for example, are very important. So usually when dealing with a customer there, we had this experience where you need to meet 3 times just to talk about your company culture and your company values and so on. And once they are sure, they would give you business. They actually don't meet with you to talk about cultural values unless they feel that you are a fit. Okay, so even meeting to discuss that, it's a good step forward, but you will take a long time to discuss that. And in Sweden, for example, a sales cycle lasts 2 or 3 times longer than in the US. Okay, so get ready for this cultural differences, and if you're prepared in advance, you would take it as a positive. So our customer, when he was at the 3rd meeting talking about in the agenda, you know, cultural values again, he was like, I don't think this is moving anywhere. I'm not planning to go to Sweden anymore. And we encouraged them, and actually by the 3rd meeting, they decided to move forward with the project. But this was like 6 months of only talking about, so what does your company do, and how are your people educated, and how do you communicate, and so on, okay? For example, there are very big differences between us as European and Asia, as you can imagine. I could spend quite a lot of time, but I think we're all aware of how different the cultures are. I would advise you to pay close attention to high nationalism. For example, in Germany or in France, where going to that market means you have to localize your communication. So if you go to an industry trade show in France, you have to speak French. Ideally, you have to have a French partner that you present to every meeting. In Germany, ideally, you would use, for example, right now, there are things like the Bavarian Bridge, Business Bavarian Bridge, or there are some consulting companies that are trying to build bridges between cultures, because they are aware that, for example, in Germany, the fact that they only trust, let's say, German technology is a barrier to the economic growth in there. in the study that I mentioned, there was a lack like of 50,000 jobs unfulfilled in a normal hiring process, like 3 to 6 months, and they would still not outsource because they would not trust another, let's say, supplier from outside the country. So please be aware of these differences and understand in advance what it takes. There is a way to go about it. For example, since I mentioned AHK just prior to this, for Germany, you may want to use AHK to enter and to match you with the right partners in Germany, okay? And other studies show, for example, there was this study that was done for 300 participants, I think. 1 second, let me dig it out. So there was a really interesting study done for cultural differences, and the research tool was called meta-analysis. So what that shows is actually they analyzed 558 people over 35 years on work-related values in 32 countries. And what they proved is that, for example, an American walking down the street of Shanghai is more likely to meet Chinese people with values closer to his, rather than, for example, a Chinese that's on the higher business, let's say, executive, with an average Chinese person. What that means is that, to put it in plain words, I have more similarities with business people and peers that have the same education and position in the company and in the industry, in any culture, than I am with a millennial, let's say, in my family, okay? So that also says that cultural bias is, and stereotypes don't really apply to most professional individuals. In IT, people do manage, for example, in cross-border teams. And you know this, for example, if you're in an outsourcing business, if you have an IT person that's working with an IT person in the States, they do great against language barriers and against business barriers. However, to get to that level, so to get to these two people to work together, a business person in your company needs to gain the trust of a business person in the US. So this is where still you have to be aware, but it's like, be aware of them, try to figure out solutions to overcome what you know it's running in the background of people's mind due to cultural set, but it's not the only thing that you should, let's say, focus on, right? Because there's also similarities cross-border. Government and politics is an obvious one. It's easier to expand, of course, to countries that are stable and have a stable political climate and have stable economic regulations. Although, you know, even this change due to elections or things like that. So please make sure that you reevaluate based on the political or governmental changes your plans to expand to this new market, okay? The government usually encourages, let's say, local companies in some areas. For example, in France, there is a tax exemption for software R&D, for IT R&D actually. If I'm not mistaken, it may be research and development in general, which what that means is that trying to outsource work from France, unless they don't have programmers in there, may be really difficult. And we've seen a lot of French outsourcing companies expand due to these tax exemptions to other countries in Europe. For example, in Romania, they have really big development center just because they have this tax exemption locally, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that if you have a really good product from for the French market, you should not go there. So this affects only if you are, let's say, in R&D sector or in software development and are trying to get business from France, okay? But you have to be aware about these differences. The legal and regulatory framework actually is the critical one, that you have to have a good bookkeeper and lawyer to guide you. Don't trust anybody. Don't do your research over internet. Try to find, for some markets, we may be able also to recommend some peers. We don't do services in this space, but for sure, don't try to go with your research through the internet, because you may also find weird people that don't know necessarily accounting or bookkeeping processes locally and so on. For example, one thing, since you mentioned that some of you have your own products or IP, make sure that you are protected. And talking about models to expand to the new business, I actually added this while we were talking. You may want to consider licensing to the new territory, right? Like maybe in Germany, it's easier to license your technology to someone. Although, talking about Germany, I'm not sure if you know that they're trying to set up this European cloud. So most of the technologies that they see that they're going mainstream, they're trying to make it in a German way. So hopefully even licensing works for some of these territories. But also make sure that it's not just all about your product or your business. For example, in France, you have to be very aware of the labor regulations, right? Or, you know, nobody knows how the Brexit is gonna hit our business with the UK just yet. So please make sure that you are aware about this, and especially with GDPR and the spam regulations in the States. We have not met yet sensible situations like this, fortunately. So I cannot talk from experience here, but I know for sure that these are going to be enforced more and more as privacy of people becomes an issue. And companies like France or Germany are very sensitive from this point of view. So please make sure you do your homework prior to expanding to the new market, okay? One that we can talk about, and this is something actually is within our grasp, is the product service adoption. So basically, it's very important that your product is accepted locally. And sometimes it's a matter of branding or of translation or of packing, right? And depending upon the brand that you feel is suited locally, you should adapt, or depending upon sometimes the delivery model, or so don't be fixed in the idea that you have a great product or a great service and people are looking forward to embrace it. You have to be sensitive to the local market. There is also government protectionism to the local brands. Sometimes it's even easier to set up, because we spoke about the way to expand, it's easier to set up a local brand or a local company legal wise. I'm not saying about all the expenses, but it's easier because you may get the same support or the same, let's say, protectionism as the local business, okay? And so I've seen this many times when, for example, a product in Ukraine expands to the Polish market, or a product from Bulgaria expands to the Romanian market, or so I've seen this product service adoption sometimes works great from the first point, but sometimes you need to do a lot of research and customization of your product in order to be accepted of the local market, okay? So what are the next steps if we talk strictly about, let's say, the international market? First of all, do not ignore your local market or the business that you have right now on the existing markets when expanding to a new one. I mentioned here that I would say 20% of our people go with 30% maximum effort or money invested into expanding your business abroad. So what that means is that if you make $1,000 in total revenue, please don't risk more than 20 to 30% off of that into your new business development abroad, okay? Or the effort, or your time, your resources, and so on, because that represents the stability of your company. And even though the new market may seem very promising, it may take a while to figure out the product adoption or the service adoption, or it may take a while in Sweden for you to get business, even if the conversations are great. So you don't want to focus just on that, okay? Another thing that you may want to do is don't hope that international business is the cure to all diseases. For example, I'm not sure if you know, but even big businesses fail because they don't, let's say, pay close attention to being focused. If you know, last century, the average lifespan of a company in Fortune 500 was 60 years. So these are huge companies that have a lot of resources. Nowadays, the average lifespan of a company in Fortune 500 is 20 years, right? And they have access to international resources, and they have huge resources and so on. So please don't count on the fact that going to another market will solve your, let's say, all of your business problems, okay? So with that being said, to, let's say, make you aware of the risk, please understand the market that you are going to. You need to personalize your communication to the local market. I would advise you to build a prospect base in advance. I actually believe that talking about models to expand, there is a way that, for example, you build a prospect base in advance, you start connecting with them. You can address this in your marketing. Let's say you can try inbound marketing for a while to build awareness, just so that the market knows about you prior to entering there. So definitely please try to, let's say, spread your word and message before you enter into the new market. And my own preferred model, and the way we managed to expand very well the business, was to find advocates and influencers. Maybe influencers is a big word because back then we didn't have influencers, but someone that is a voice in that space that can prove for the quality of our services and solutions, and based on their the trust and the image that they have, we can use them to set up and build the values around that. So basically use that relationship. And another thing in creating a go-to-market plan, as usual, set a clear action for 3 to 6 months ahead. So what that means is, I would give any new market 3 to 6 months to see what happens. And I would also set up in advance some KPIs. And if those KPIs are not met, first of all, it becomes, you put less energy into it, but then you also have to adjust and set up another pilot phase. So I would use at this pilot phase these days, when business is happening so fast, to only 3 to 6 months. Of course, it can be part of your 10-year business strategy. But what I mean by the 3 to 6 months pilot phase is that if I go to a new market in 3 to 6 months, I have to have a really one good account, business account, let's say a good big sale or a good big partner or something. And that becomes my target. And everybody's focus is on the new market is based on this, right? It doesn't mean that my plan is not for 3 years or for 5 years, because I said it helps much more if you think about developing business long-term, but still you have to have the rocks. If you're familiar with the entrepreneur operating system or the scale-up methodology, you have to have these rocks in place where you know for sure that you met that in 3 to 6 months, so you're on a good track, or you need to adjust. sharing experiences. First of all, of course, nobody expects that it will go out as planned. For example, sometimes gets much better. I see that it doesn't work if you don't have a good connection there. I called that the ambassador, but it can be a partner, it can be a customer that's your ambassador, right? You sometimes can relocate someone in your own business. So let's say you have someone in the upper management, a good partner in the business management, or a sales manager, or someone, or a good project manager. For example, for Germany, we have a company that expanded to Germany by relocating for a few months a year person, a project manager that didn't even speak German, but they relocated it in Munich, and this person was able to meet with customers on site, right? So that solved some of the distance and the communications and the trust factor, okay? I would say pay very close attention to communications, just because I think that you should invest 3 times more focus into communication with your new market. What that means is not PR. It means that you have to communicate much more with the client. So if you have a weekly report with the client in your home market, in the new market, I'd suggest to have at least 3 touch points in a week with that customer, okay? Just to take the pause, just to align much better, just to feel the culture much better, right? So that means this is within your business communication, right? Just so that you can be more agile, okay? I would advise that you adopt to the local culture. For example, today it's Thanksgiving in the States. Please make sure if you have contacts or customers or friends in there to send them a nice message. For them, this is very important. But another thing, talking about local culture, for example, in the States, they cannot stand if you send marketing or sales messages in their days off or outside business hours. And I know that for us, this is not an issue. Like if I get a message via LinkedIn on Sunday, I'm like, okay, I'm going to reply on Monday, or I don't even know if I've seen it, because probably I'm not having my LinkedIn account open on Sunday. I actually do, but most of us don't. But what I mean is that if someone in the States receives it, first of all, they see this company as desperate. They're like, oh my God, they're even bugging me in my free time. They don't even know if it's automated or not, but they see this as a infringement on their time, which is very limited anyway. So please make sure that you understand these differences and adapt to the local culture, and even sometimes celebrate Thanksgiving if you have an office in the States, let's say, order a turkey or something. Get at a reasonable cost the first quick wins on the new market, just so that you gain trust and you also gain referrals from that market, and plan for a long term, as I mentioned, your business there, so that you are committed to making it a success. Something that I personally saw is that, for example, it really helped a lot when I went to the US and to Poland and to Austria, and that I made friends there. So my first aim, even so that I can enjoy traveling, was to discover things and people that I like. And somehow, you know, I fell in love, for example, with Poland. And now I've been a few days in Sofia, which is my most extended stay so far. And I really love to have an office there. It's an amazing city. So I think that, you know, liking the local culture and building within yourself some emotion is really helpful. We gain the steady and solid accounts. We gain a lot of know-how, as I mentioned initially. And we actually, when there was the crisis situation, we didn't have any customer back home, but we only resisted in the business just based on the customers that we had on other markets. So that mitigated a lot of our risk. And I think that we gained, and it's not just me, but the whole team, you know, Monica, who's in the call, can share about this, and Andrea can share about this, and May can share about how they gained friends together with experience on this new market. The entrepreneurship organization that I'm a part of says, has this as one of the values, which is boldly go. There is no secret formula for success unless someone dares a lot to, you know, step forward into the new market. So I hope that this is just the first step and an inspiration, and you will boldly go, and I will hear about your experiences and success stories. And I'd be happy to, you know, help with anything I can. Again, I do like to help everybody, especially entrepreneurship organizations that are trying to make a difference in the world. So if you have a bit more time, and if I hope this wasn't, you know, I hope that it was useful enough for you, but if you have a bit more time, we can spend time for Q&A session, and we can maybe, you know, discuss what's been your experience with international business, what's been your challenges, and see if there's more sharing to do. So please go ahead. This is an open discussion if you want to share anything. No, it was so clear. Everybody's so, was this relevant for your type of experiences on the international markets? Do you think the information that I shared was relevant or is useful somehow to you?
That was actually a brilliant story from Yash, Romania. So we're in an expansion phase. We're doing service, IT services. We're in an expansion phase. In Germany, we already have some clients in the US and other countries in Europe, but not in Germany. And now we're looking at Munich and Frankfurt. Initially, we've been in Berlin, but Berlin is not. There is no so much business, so to say, in Berlin, at least not for what we're doing. There's an entire startup world there growing. Mm-hmm. It's not like in the newspapers, although, but probably in the, I don't know, maybe 3 to 5 years it will be. But for us, at least for us, in the next 1 or 2 years, probably we won't be able to do business in Berlin. The business in Germany is in Munich, Düsseldorf, Frankfurt, the western part of it.
So Florin, and anybody that's interested in the German market, if you want, either now or after this session, please share your contact details, and I will send you also the AHK contact details for your specific country, but also we have some other, let's say, recommendations for customers that are trying to go, or companies that are trying to enter German markets. So I'd be happy to send you those resources and introduce you. AHK promised, both in Romania and in Bulgaria, that they will support any Romanian company, technology company, that wants to enter the German market. So give them a chance.
I've already sent you an email, so
okay, amazing.
Unfortunately, I have to run because I double booked a little bit the next half of hour. So it was a real pleasure. Thank you very much for the.
Thank you. Thanks for attending.
And bye bye to everyone. Have a good day. Bye bye.
You too. Bye. So how about anybody else? What were your experiences on our market?
Loredana, we have a question from Miruna Dumitrascu on the chat.
Please.
So Mirna asked, what should be the strategy for a Romanian company that wants to promote cloud services internationally? She's also mentioning that UK is an example, taking into account that the competitors are Amazon, Microsoft, and other global companies.
Okay. Actually, we've worked with M24/7 in Romania, Miruna, if you are aware about them. And we also work in the States with a lot of cloud services companies. There's no one, fit all. I'd have to know a bit more information about your company. UK is a very good market. And I think that Germany is a good market just because they don't trust any cloud provider from the US. They actually think it's bad using US technology, and they have this movement around moving everything to Europe. In the UK in particular, I think that you need to leverage some existing networks in the cloud services space. We had the customer that's called River Meadow. They entered from the US market, they entered the UK market, but actually knowing the cultural similarities and differences there, it's as tough for a US cloud services company to enter UK, but they hired, for example, there a specific person that managed their business, and initially it was contract based. The same happened with other Romanian customers that are entering IT services, not necessarily cloud. So I've seen this trend of hiring someone local in terms of business development representative, although they were generating the business from the US or from Romania or from other parts, still it paid when at the meeting there was a UK person involved. So this may be one of the things that you can consider. Cloud is a bit more complicated. So if you want, we can take this aside so that I understand, what kind of cloud services, if it's migration, if it's, and we can discuss more on it. I'd love to share the info that I have.
At this point, we are we are in Romania developing this service. We made a product that we are proud of at this point, and we want to get more customers in Romania. Actually, this is one of the reasons that we're working with the NNC services.
Mm-hmm.
The plan for internationalizing this service in particular is for a long time from now on. So it's not a plan for the next 5 years, I think. The question was about what elements should we take into account for the local market in UK, for example. And your answer for a local salesperson is a very good one. So we don't need to actually have our company have an office there. I think we just need a partner, a local partner. A local partner that should be a company or should be just a salesperson that can see our interests in the market there.
I saw more activity when there's a salesperson involved, not a company. In a company, nobody's really responsible. I think that it's better when you have like a real salesperson that's maybe just part-time involved with your business. You can also have a virtual office that's outside London. I think that even we have a virtual office and a colleague in UK, and there's plenty of technology destinations, let's say technology hub, where you can set up a virtual office in the UK. And also another thing that you can do is there are some specific events for cloud in particular that you may want to join. And I think that let's say the project team knows. So if you ask them, they will surely answer. And I'm also going to share some that we learned from example from River Meadow trying to enter the UK market. Okay.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much for answering the question.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. Any other experiences?
There is one more question that came into the chat section. Machik, sorry for misspelling, asks what are the main 3 and most common mistakes to avoid when going internationally?
Okay, so a few I think I mentioned. One is neglecting your existing business just because the sun looks brighter on the other side. I think that it's very important that in order for this to be a factor of growth, not just for the sake of having another office or another business up there, it's very, very important that you don't neglect the business that you already have, no matter if it's at home or on other markets, and you pay close attention to that. To most of the services business, since I assume you are in a services business market, but please let me know if I'm wrong. For most of the services business, 60 to 80% of their customer base is still from referrals. What that means is that new customer acquisition is going to be tough on the new market, and if you defocus, you won't get the 60 to 80% referrals to grow your business from your existing customer base. So that's the first big one. The second big one is assuming that people act the same way as you do in there. For example, assuming that if you go to the Netherlands or if you go to Germany and you talk to someone, they will do as you would do in such a conversation, or they would react as you would react in such a conversation. I think I mentioned our UK experience, but for example, in the States, there's different types of business peers. Some of them are really worth your trust and can gain it up front. But in the States, people tend to exaggerate their experience, their background, what they know and who they know. So it seems that they are running the country, but in fact, they're nobody in there. And supposing that us from Europe, we believe more in, let's say, we're more conservative about bragging. So even if we know something, we would be, let's say, more moderate about sharing it. These other people, you know, even if they cross the street next to Kentucky, they would mention it that they were part of the Kentucky development. And that is a mistake, you know, trusting that whatever you hear or see, it's similar with how you would do it, or how you would behave, or what you would reply with. So that's the second biggest one. And again, these are all from my experience. And the third thing is not being accountable. So for example, if this is why I mentioned that it's important to have some milestones when expanding to a new market, because you don't know if you're successful or not, and sometimes you cannot even count how much effort you lost or how much money you lost if you don't set clear milestones. Okay, so if you don't give yourself, let's say, 6 months, and if you're not accountable that, okay, people, our goal for going to the, to Munich was to have at least 5 opportunities, out of which 1 real business contract, let's say, or we wanted to hire in the Philippines 5 people, and at least we should have 4 on board in 3 months or something. So if you're not accountable this way, you will lose effort, but more, you will lose opportunity, because if you're not accountable, you don't know, was it 6 months or 3 months since we went there? Did we really do anything? And the memory tends to not be clear and focused unless you have this point. So I would say that in order of priority, these are the 3 things you should avoid when, as a mistake. There's many, many more, but I think that you're onto a good track if you can avoid these 3. Anything else? Okay, so I'd love to hear more about your stories, And please, if you want, we can set up a one-to-one conversation. I'd love to advise you. It doesn't matter if we work or if we don't work together, and understand more about what you do, and you know, what are your plans to expand our international market. I will share after the webinar the recording, since a few people already asked for it, and also my availability, so you can book a direct conversation if you want to. Thanks for listening. I hope this has been really useful. There's a bit more information in the presentation about NNC, so if you want to take a look at it, and if you have questions on that, please let us know later on. And I hope it was a valuable experience, and look forward to meeting each one of you.